All right, today we're diving deep into the world of a truly fascinating and sneaky parasite, Strongyloides stercoralis. This isn't just any worm, it's a master of stealth, able to live inside a human host for an entire lifetime, often without a single symptom. That is, until the conditions are just right for it to become incredibly dangerous. So let's unpack how it pulls this off. We're going to start with the parasite's profile, get to know the worm itself. Then we'll unravel its amazingly complex life cycle. After that, we'll explore the impact it has on people, and finally, we'll cover how it's found and how we fight it. It's a pretty incredible story, from its basic biology all the way to the clinic. I mean, just think about that for a second. An infection you get once, and it never has to come from the outside world again. It just sustains itself, generation after generation, all inside your body. This incredible and, frankly, terrifying ability is called autoinfection, and it's the absolute key to Strongyloides stercoralis' success.
So let's get a proper introduction. What exactly are we looking at when we talk about this organism?
Well, what we have here is a creature with some seriously remarkable features. First off, it's tiny. It's the smallest intestinal nematode known to infect humans, with the female worm measuring just about 2.5 millimeters. But here's the kicker. She's parthenogenic. That means she can produce viable eggs all by herself, no male required. She just burrows into the lining of the small intestine and gets the infection started solo. Now, to really get a grip on its life cycle, you have to know the two main larval forms. You've got the rhabditiform larva, or L1. Think of this as the baby stage. It's non-infective, hatches inside the intestine, and it's what you typically find if you looked at a stool sample. It's super small, only about 1/4 of a millimeter. But then it grows up and transforms into the filariform larva, or L3. This one's bigger, more slender, and this is the one you have to watch out for. This is the infective stage, fully capable of burrowing right through unbroken skin. And that brings us to what really sets Strongyloides apart from the pack. Its life cycle isn't some simple straight line. No, it has 3 completely different strategies it can use to survive and spread. First up is the direct cycle. This is pretty standard for what we call soil-transmitted worms. The non-infective L1 larvae get passed in the stool, they grow up in the soil to become the infective L3s, and then they just wait for someone to walk by barefoot. Once they get through the skin, they go on this wild journey into the bloodstream, to the lungs. They get coughed up, swallowed, and then finally land in the small intestine where they become adults. But here's where it gets really interesting. Path number 2 is the indirect cycle. So those L1 larvae in the soil, they don't have to just wait for a host. They can actually mature into free-living adult males and females, right there in the dirt. They can mate and produce a whole new generation outside of a person, basically cranking up their numbers in the environment before producing the infective L3 larvae. It's an incredible evolutionary backup plan. And finally, we have the third and clinically the most important cycle, autoinfection. This is the absolute game changer. Here, the L1 larvae mature into the infective L3 stage before they even leave the host's body. They can then immediately re-infect that same person, either by penetrating the wall of the intestine, that's internal autoinfection, or by penetrating the skin around the anus, which is external. This cycle is what allows the infection to last for years, even decades. Okay, so this complex biology translates into a really wide spectrum of what can happen to a person who's infected. It can range from absolutely nothing at all to a catastrophic, fatal illness. You know, for a lot of people, especially if their immune system is working well, they can have a chronic Strongyloides infection and feel totally fine. If symptoms do pop up, they usually follow the worm's path. You might get an itchy rash where it entered the skin, maybe a cough as it passes through the lungs, and some GI issues like diarrhea. But often, the single biggest clue is a blood test that shows a high level of eosinophils for no obvious reason. Now, there is one very specific telltale sign of this infection. It's a rash called larva currens, which literally means running larva. And that's exactly what it looks like. These itchy, snake-like tracks that move very quickly across the skin, usually around the buttocks. This is caused by the L3 larva migrating during that external autoinfection cycle. It's what we call a pathognomonic sign. If you see it, you should be thinking strongyloides. And this is where things can get really serious. It is absolutely critical to understand the difference between hyperinfection and disseminated disease, especially for patients with weakened immune systems. Hyperinfection is when that autoinfection cycle goes into overdrive, and you get a massive explosion in the number of worms, but they're still sticking to their usual turf, the gut and the lungs. Disseminated disease is when all bets are off. The larvae spread everywhere, invading the brain, the heart, the liver. Any organ is fair game. And this is what can lead to deadly outcomes like meningitis. So, given how well this parasite can hide and how dangerous it can be, how on earth do we find it, and what can we do to fight it? Well, diagnosis can be really tricky, mostly because the larvae aren't always passed in the stool. The first step is usually a direct microscopic exam of a fresh stool sample. If that doesn't work, you can try special culture methods that help coax out any larvae that might be there. For the really tough cases, you can use serology to look for antibodies your body has made against the parasite, or even highly sensitive PCR tests that can detect the parasite's DNA. When it comes to treatment, thankfully, the choice is pretty clear. Ivermectin is the drug of choice. It's just plain more effective than the alternative, albendazole. For a straightforward infection, a quick 1 or 2 day course does the trick. But for that life-threatening disseminated disease we talked about, the treatment has to be much longer, at least 5 to 7 days to have any hope of clearing that massive number of larvae. And this right here is probably the single most important clinical point in this entire explainer. Listen closely. Because a healthy immune system is what keeps this parasite in check, if you give an infected person immunosuppressive drugs, like steroids, you can light a match on that autoinfection cycle. You can trigger a fatal hyperinfection, so you must rule out Strongyloides before you start someone on these kinds of therapies. It is absolutely critical. So, what about prevention? Well, on a public health scale, the strategy is pretty straightforward. First, proper sanitation is key to stop fecal contamination of the soil. In places where the worm is common, simply wearing shoes and gloves can prevent the larvae from getting through the skin. And finally, because even people without symptoms can spread it, you have to treat every single person who's infected to really break that cycle of transmission. So we'll end on this thought. You have a parasite with 3 life cycles, one that doesn't need a partner to reproduce, and a built-in mechanism that lets it live inside you forever, which can be turned into a weapon if your immune system falters. It's a stunning example of adaptation, and it makes Strongyloides stercoralis one of the most formidable and, you have to admit, fascinating parasites out there.